Hello, and thanks once again for joining us for this Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 19th day of July, 2022. I'm David Percy. Up first graphic here, hazardous weather, and we've got no watches, warnings, or advisories out around the state today. So moving on from there to the fire danger graphic, and some medium fire danger up in the north slope there on out toward the central Arctic coast, but nothing too serious. And then kind of increased area of high fire danger there in the Yukon Flats areas, kind of either side of the Yukon River, nearer east of Fort Yukon there. And that in spite of the fact that up to 1/10 of an inch of precipitation, or 5/1500ths, fell in some shower activity there in the last 12 hours. Nearly 1/10 of an inch falling at Eagle and Fort Yukon, but other areas didn't get that. It's more showery, hit and miss nature. So the high fire danger there, where the sun came out today and they didn't see much in the way of shower activity. But again, really nothing serious at all in the way of fire danger anywhere in the state, and expected to continue that way for the next several days as surges of moisture, rain, cool conditions move in from the Bering Sea for the next 3 to 5 days. And on the satellite imagery here, you can see that spinning low pressure area right near Kotzebue shows up pretty vividly here on the visible imagery. Now pushing a front that moved into the west coast last night and overnight pushed eastward across the Kuskokwim Valley in the western interior, and today kind of slowing up as it gets into more of a southwesterly wind flow. As it moves eastward, the winds go westerly aloft, turn southwesterly, so it's hung up right there from Shelikof Strait up across south central Alaska, right on up into the Fairbanks area. It kind of breaks up a little bit there, as I mentioned, some shower activity, the Yukon Flats area, uplands, and then back into some rain on the southern slopes of the eastern Alaska Range, and it wraps back in across the Arctic coast there. Showers over the panhandle today, although there was some clearing in drier conditions down to the south Ketchikan toward Dixon Entrance. Kodiak Island seen some sunshine early on, but clouds associated with that band of moisture moving across Shelikof Strait and Kodiak Island, seeing an increase in the clouds currently after the sunny start to the day. Kind of an increasing cloud pattern this afternoon. Same thing there for the Alaska Peninsula, Sandpoint. Some pretty good sunshine. Eastern Aleutian, same thing. Had some clear skies this morning. Pribilof Island, St. Paul, fell to 36 degrees. And I don't know if that was a record low or not, but clear skies and light winds. Some lower clouds moving in this afternoon, holding temperatures in the 40s there. And also some clearing around St. Lawrence Island, drier air coming out of the Russian Far East on the back side of that low pressure area. But the Bering Sea in general, a lot of clouds with some areas of shower activity, mostly dissipating south of the Aleutians there. Next system coming out of the Russian Far East, spreading warm front type moisture in the form of light rain, fog, and drizzle into the northwest Bering Sea, St. Matthew Island, and now just coming down toward the Pribilof Islands. Another batch of moisture coming into the west coast there, up to the Seward Peninsula with that low pressure area spinning and slowly weakening there right near Kotzebue. And you can see the frontal boundary broken up north of Fairbanks, or Fairbanks southward, pretty solid band of clouds and rain all the way down to southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay area. Some clearing over the Copper River Basin allowed temperatures to rise into the lower to mid 60s, or actually mid to upper 60s, give or take there by mid-afternoon. And on the chart, there's that front, about anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of an inch of rain falling today over south central Alaska, with rain up into the Tanana Valley across Denali Park area, and then back to the northwest there across the Koyukuk-Kobuk Valley into the northwest part of the state, Noatak Valley northwest coast, with a main low center slowly lifting northward. Then you can see the next system there over the northwest Bering Sea and the associated warm front. Generally westerly flow over the Bering Sea will carry that southeastward initially, as a new low there south of Kodiak Island will grab onto some moisture and send that northeastward toward the Panhandle tonight. You can see increasing rain for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Dry over the southern Panhandle, some clearing, but increasing chances of rain up north there as that system approaches. And this evening, look for some moderate amounts of rain to continue over Prince William Sound, northern Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, and the Matanuska Valley. Susitna Valley, periods of rain continue. Pretty good showers up to the Alaska Range into the upper and mid-Tanana Valley. And kind of a dry area there between the two systems, with that incoming system bringing increasing wind and rain, moderate to possibly briefly heavy at times, into the southwest coast. And then dry for the Aleutians, kind of staying south of the action there, just getting grazed with some light moisture with westerly winds. Not all that strong, pretty light out west, and maybe up to 20 knots or so. Atka over toward the Fox Islands. But weakening low there along the northwest coast keeps it unsettled and showery. But the northeast part of the state will stay dry, as well as the Arctic coast. And then for tomorrow, that low moves into the Yukon Delta, and as that front swings eastward there, we're looking at gale force winds along the Kuskokwim Delta coast, with possible high surf over Togiak Bay with that southwest wind gusting to 35, maybe 40 knots. Could see some minor beach erosion and pretty good sea heights with that, along with the moderate to possibly heavy rainfall associated with the moisture coming in. And that'll be spreading into south central Alaska. It could be a fairly dry start to the day tomorrow for Cook Inlet and the Matanuska-Susitna Valley, Kenai Peninsula, but increasing rain as the day wears on as that system pushes eastward, spreads the moisture in. Scattered showers, Copper River Basin up into the Tanana Valley, but looks dry. For the upper Yukon Valley, Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, could be some sun breaks up there, and also periods of rain with that moisture in that low center, heaviest in the northern and central Panhandle, lighter amounts down to the south there, maybe just some scattered shower activity for Klawock, Ketchikan, Metlakatla, those areas. Could be just no rain at all over toward Misty Fjords into Stewart. And then for the outlook on Thursday, that low center, let me back it up one, the low center there over the Yukon Delta, just south of the Yukon River there, that moves northward and weakens. And along the front, new system forms, new low pressure, weak low pressure forms as it crosses the Alaska Peninsula, which happens many times when those fronts cross the peninsula. So a new low moves northeastward there to just east of the Barren Islands tomorrow afternoon, or east of Fognak Island. The original low pulls up over the Seward Peninsula once again, slowly weakens, so wet and breezy conditions from the Yukon Delta northward across the Seward Peninsula into the Selawik Valley, Kotzebue, Noatak Valley, northwest coast, with even periods of rain along the southern slopes of the Brooks Range southward into the Kobuk and Koyukuk Valley. And another round of moderate to briefly heavy rainfall coming into south central Alaska and the Kenai Peninsula, definitely the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound area, while showers start to scatter out and diminish there over the Panhandle, that weak trough, but some weak ridging, keeping it dry down to the south and off the coast. Could see some afternoon clearing moving inland over the central and southern areas. Probably won't see much of that in the north. Bering Sea, not too bad, just a couple of weak troughs out there. And so moving on to the lows tonight, anywhere from the mid-30s, 35 to 40, Arctic coast, north slope into the Brooks Range. And then south of the mountains there, mostly in the chilly 40s, lower to mid over the southwest interior. And 40s, upper 40s for the Tanana Valley, 45 to 50 south central Alaska, mid-40s Copper River Basin. A little milder, lower 50s over the Panhandle. Otherwise, out over the Bering Sea, looking warmer, definitely about 10 degrees warmer with the clouds tonight and windier conditions and rain for the Pribilofs. And then the highs tomorrow, 65 to 70 for the greater Fairbanks area on up in toward the Yukon Flats area, Fort Yukon, Chok-Yitzhak, and Beaver, those areas. Upper 40s to mid 50s for the Arctic coast, maybe pushing near 60 in the North Slope area if you get the sunshine. Near 60 for Kodiak, and upper 50s to lower 60s for the Panhandle, and into the 50s out west. And for the overnight lows, 40s to near 50 over much of the state except the Arctic coast, back down into the mid to upper 30s, followed by highs, 65 to 70 again, eastern interior, 40s along the Arctic coast, 50s to lower 60s, southern Alaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, IFR up along the central eastern Arctic coast and in marginal VFR across the interior. VFR though, south central Alaska, Kuskokwim Valley, and the lower Yukon River area up to the northwest coast. IFR, southern Prince William Sound, eastern North Gulf Coast into the Wrangell Mountains. And the Panhandle, some marginal VFR along the central and north coast, otherwise VFR. Big batch of IFR moving into the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta areas from the Bering Sea there and extending down to Atka Island, eastward to the Alaska Peninsula. And for the afternoon, area of IFR pushes in across Bristol Bay to western Iliamna Lake and extends back to the northwest across Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula. No change up on the Arctic coast there in North Slope, but marginal VFR, southern slopes of the central and western Brooks Range into the western interior. Marginal VFR across the Copper River Basin, Madanuska, Susitna Valley, Cook Inlet, western Kenai Peninsula, Kachemak, Kamishak Bays, Kodiak Island, VFR. North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, VFR. Some marginal VFR around Yakutat. Panhandle looking really good. And southern Bering Sea, IFR. And the Aleutians mostly marginal. And for Thursday morning, IFR along the Arctic coast in areas, North Slope though, VFR. And from the Kobuk Valley westward up along the northwest coast, Noatak Valley, Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound area to Norton Bay and the Bering Strait coast, all IFR. And IFR over the northern Bering Sea, St. Matthew Island, Pribilofs, narrow band of IFR southern Bering Sea, just clipping Atka Island, extending across the eastern Aleutians. And some IFR on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, the Aleutian Range, Shelikof Strait, marginal VFR up into Cook Inlet. You can see a narrow band of IFR there clipping east side of Kodiak Island, extending up across Resurrection Bay into western Prince William Sound and central eastern Turnagain Arm, possibly to the Chugach Mountains. Marginal VFR up to the Alaska Range and right along the southeast coast. And for the afternoon, marginal VFR overspreads all of the Panhandle. Band of IFR now Prince William Sound up into the southwestern Copper River Basin, Susitna Valley, Talkeetnas, westward into the central interior. Otherwise, marginal VFR for most of mainland Alaska, Kodiak Island as well, Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, IFR central western Aleutians, areas of IFR scattered around the northern Bering Sea. Possible VFR, though, Nunivak Island, Yukon Delta coast. Otherwise, the Arctic coast looking IFR. And for Anaktuvik pass-wise, occasional marginal VFR for both Anaktuvik and Atigan. For the day Wednesday, Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR trends toward IFR throughout the afternoon with the next incoming system and a load of moisture with that. Same trend for rainy, marginal VFR trending lower into the afternoon to IFR toward evening. And for windy, marginal VFR, but VFR on north of the entrance there, north entrance into the valley. And for Isabel, marginal VFR, Mintesta, occasional marginal VFR. And Tanita, marginal VFR to VFR in the afternoon. And Portage, occasional IFR throughout the entire day, possibly. And Chilkoot and White, mostly marginal. Freezing levels, 4,000 feet over the Chukchi Sea northwest part of the state, and then 6,000 feet all the way down to northern Bristol Bay across the Kenai Peninsula there, eastward to Yakutat, 8 to 12,000 feet across the southeast coast, and 12 to 14,000 feet southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Icing, areas of isolated moderate rime icing, pretty widespread northern Bering Sea and just about all of mainland Alaska. Less of a threat there over the central and eastern North Slope and Arctic coast. Heaviest icing will be south of the Brooks Range, extending all the way down into Cook Inlet in the North Gulf Coast. And for the jet stream, strong northerlies coming out of the Russian Far East take a turn to the east, about 105 knots, and then westerly flow right across central and southern Alaska into the northern Panhandle. 45 to 50 knot westerlies there, Bristol Bay and the southwest interior. 40 knots for the Panhandle, 3,000 feet, 40 to 50 knot winds wrapping around that low coming into the Yukon Delta there, much lighter over the eastern interior and southeast coast as well as the Arctic coast. Otherwise, those strong winds will result in considerable moderate turbulence Southwest Interior, Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, and Aleutians.
Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the augmented reality sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana. Thanks. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the augmented reality sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Gina approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children, you can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah,
right?
it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good. Very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, AKwx, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is AKwx and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, AKwx, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS. And she mentioned, you know, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water. And then
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
So they're moving the
cool.
water around. And then I think they've got some props over there, because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
and there's
these,
the salmon.
Exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way, so people can, you know, interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure. That makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face, rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, I mean, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
Oh, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things than version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
I mean, we were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach. that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right?
Right.
You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is
Okay.
going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right, right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what are, give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound, and if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and
Okay.
you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down.
Okay.
And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami
Right.
or
okay.
something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology
Yes.
and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before.
Yep.
So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about EPSCoR, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKEPSCOR, right? EPSCoR, Alaska EPSCoR, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation,
Yes,
so
sir.
more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Marine forecast. Look for 20-knot winds on the central and south coast of the Panhandle for the day Wednesday. Seas at about 6 to 7 feet. South-southeast winds 15 to 20 knots on the north coast. In the northern inside channel, south winds 15 knots. Stevens Passage, south at 20. And Clarence Strait, southeast winds 15 knots with 3-foot seas. And for Thursday, Clarence Strait, southeast at 10, and a south breeze at 10 knots for Stevens Passage. Lynn Canal, south winds 15 knots. And on the south coast, winds will be west-southwest at 10 knots with 6-foot seas. And the north coast, winds will be 15 to 25 knots from the south with 6-foot seas. Prince William Sound, east winds 15 knots, seas 2 feet. Eastern North Gulf Coast, southwest winds 15 knots with 5-foot seas. Light variable winds for the western North Gulf Coast. Barren Islands, west winds 15 knots. Small craft advisories for Kamishak Bay, southwest at 25. And Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, south to southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Thursday, Cook Inlet, south to southeast winds of 15 knots, seas down to 3 feet. West winds 15 knots for Kamishak Bay. Barren Islands, southwesterlies at 25 knots with 6-foot seas. And the North Gulf Coast will be looking at south winds at 20 knots with 6-foot seas. And east winds at 20 knots for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 20 knots. Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisories. Southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, seas just under 10 feet. And Bristol Bay, small craft advisories, south at 30 knots with 7-foot seas. Outlook for Thursday, Bristol Bay, west winds 20 knots. And the Alaska Peninsula, Bering Sea side, west winds 15 knots from Cape Sarachev to Sitkinak, west winds 25 knots. Kodiak Island, west-southwest winds 20 to 25 knots with 5 to 8-foot seas. And the Eastern Aleutians, small craft advisories, west-southwest winds 20 to 30 knots. And for the Central Aleutians, west winds 20 to 25 knots. Western Aleutians, southwest 25. And for Thursday, Western Aleutians, south to southeast winds 20 knots. And the central areas will be looking at a southwest wind at 20 knots. Eastern Aleutians, west to southwesterlies at 20 to 25 knots with 6 to 8-foot seas. Southwest coast, Kuskokwim Delta coast, south of Nunivak Island, gale warnings for Wednesday. Southwest winds 35 knots. Small craft advisories for the Pribilofs, west at 30, west winds at 30 knots also for the Yukon Delta coast, and St. Lawrence Island will be looking at north winds at 25 knots with 8-foot seas, northwest 25 for St. Matthew Island, and Norton Sound southeast 25. For Thursday, Norton Sound, south winds 20 knots, and for St. Lawrence Islands, northwest at 30. Small craft advisories also for the Yukon Delta coast, west winds 30 knots, Kuskokwim Delta coast, west at 20. Light variable winds for the Pribilof, seas still around 5 feet, and northwest winds 25 knots for the St. Matthew Island waters. For the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, west-southwest winds at 10 knots. Central coast east at 10, and the west side westerly or easterlies at 15 knots. And then from Wales to Cape Lisburne, looking at winds at about 20 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas. And on Thursday, small craft advisories from Wales to Cape Lisburne for north winds 25 knots, Cape Lisburne to Cape Hope, or to Cape Beaufort, northeast at 30 knots, western Arctic coast northeast 20 knot winds, and east northeast 15 knots for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast on Thursday. And for tonight, rain shifting eastward, and they'll be becoming more showery for south central Alaska to the western Alaska range. Some pretty good showers, though, up toward the central Alaska range, maybe in the Tanana Valley, with showers pushing up to north of Eagle. And then rain increasing eastern North Gulf Coast. Good amount this evening for Prince William Sound. They'll be pushing in the northern panhandle. Southern southeast coast stays dry. Next system spreading rain and wind into the Yukon Delta tonight. And that shifts eastward, covering all of the southwest interior, spreading into Cook Inlet tomorrow afternoon. And showers for the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, down across the Copper River Basin. Periods of rain spreading in over the panhandle. And for Thursday, continued cloudy, wet, and cool with another round of moderate to possibly briefly heavy rain for southern Alaska. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.